Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as the morning sun climbed higher over his small farm in Millbrook Valley. His calloused hands gripped the worn handle of his hoe, working the soil that had been in his family for 3 generations. The 50 acres weren't much compared to the massive agricultural operations in neighboring counties, but it was home. Every furrow, every fence post, every weathered barn board told the story of hard work and simple dreams. The alarm on his old pickup truck radio crackled to life, reminding him it was already 9 in the morning. Marcus had been up since 4:30, feeding the chickens, milking the 2 dairy cows, and checking on the vegetable crops that would soon be ready for the local farmers market. His routine never varied much. Wake before dawn, work the land, tend the animals, eat simple meals, and fall asleep exhausted but satisfied. At 32, Marcus lived alone in the modest farmhouse where he'd grown up. His parents had passed away 5 years earlier in a car accident, leaving him the farm and a mountain of debt. The bank had been patient, but Marcus knew he was walking a tightrope. One bad season, one major equipment failure, one unexpected expense could mean losing everything his family had built. His neighbors often wondered why he never married. Marcus was handsome in a rugged way, with kind brown eyes and a gentle smile that appeared whenever he talked to children or helped elderly folks with their groceries in town. But dating seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. Between the farm work and his part-time job at the hardware store on weekends, there wasn't much time for romance. Besides, what woman would want to share a life of early mornings, dirt under fingernails, and uncertainty about the future? The truth was, Marcus had learned to find joy in simple things. The sound of rain on the barn roof during a drought, the first tomato of the season, the way his border collie, Rex, would circle the chickens with precision and pride. These moments made up for the loneliness that sometimes crept in during the long winter evenings. This particular Tuesday morning started like any other, but as Marcus worked in the field closest to Highway 47, he noticed more traffic than usual. The road connected the wealthy Riverside Heights neighborhood to downtown Millbrook, and during rush hour, expensive cars would speed past his property. BMW sedans, Mercedes SUVs, sleek sports cars driven by people heading to important meetings, and high-powered lunches. Marcus never felt envious watching them pass. He understood that everyone had their own struggles, regardless of the price tag on their vehicle. His grandfather had taught him that wealth wasn't measured in dollars but in peace of mind and honest work. Still, he sometimes wondered what it would be like to live without constantly worrying about money, to fix something when it broke instead of figuring out how to make it last another year. Around 10:30, Marcus was loading produce into wooden crates for the afternoon delivery to Peterson's Market when he heard the unmistakable sound of screeching tires. He looked up to see a large black SUV careening down the hill toward the intersection near his property. The vehicle was moving too fast, weaving slightly as if the driver had lost control. Without thinking, Marcus dropped the crate of tomatoes and ran toward the road. His work boots pounded against the dirt as he tried to get a better view of what was happening. The SUV was heading straight for the small bridge that crossed Miller Creek. But at that speed and angle, it would never make the turn. That's when he saw her. A woman was walking along the narrow sidewalk that ran parallel to the road, completely unaware of the approaching danger. She wore an elegant cream-colored dress and was talking on her phone, her attention focused on the conversation. Her blonde hair caught the sunlight as she moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to safety and predictability. Marcus realized with horror that the SUV was going to jump the curb. The driver seemed to be fighting with the steering wheel, but the vehicle's momentum was carrying it directly toward the pedestrian. In that split second, Marcus made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He sprinted across his property, vaulted over the low stone wall that bordered the road, and launched himself toward the woman. She looked up just as he reached her green eyes widening in surprise and confusion. Without explanation or apology, Marcus wrapped his arms around her waist and tackled her to the ground, rolling them both away from the sidewalk just as the black SUV crashed through the space where she had been standing. The impact was tremendous. The SUV plowed through a fire hydrant, sending a geyser of water 30 feet into the air, before finally coming to rest against a large oak tree. The woman in Marcus's arms was trembling, her phone scattered in pieces across the asphalt. For a moment, they lay there in the grass, both breathing heavily, both trying to understand what had just happened. Marcus was the first to move. He gently helped the woman sit up, his concerned eyes scanning her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with adrenaline. "Did I hurt you when I knocked you down?" She stared at him for a long moment, as if seeing him for the first time. There was something in her expression that Marcus couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly, but also a kind of wonder. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and shaky. "You saved my life." Marcus glanced back at the crashed SUV where other passers-by were now running to help the driver. Steam rose from the crumpled hood and broken glass sparkled in the sunlight. If he hadn't acted when he did, if he hadn't been in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, this beautiful stranger would have been killed. Anyone would have done the same thing, he said quietly, helping her to her feet. But even as the words left his mouth, he wondered if that was really true. How many people would have noticed? How many would have reacted quickly enough? How many would have risked their own safety for a complete stranger? As sirens wailed in the distance and the chaos of the accident scene unfolded around them, neither Marcus nor the woman realized that this moment of terror and heroism was just the beginning of something neither of them had been looking for, but both desperately needed. The ambulance arrived within minutes, followed closely by police cars and a fire truck. Marcus found himself standing awkwardly to the side as paramedics checked over the woman he had saved. Her name, he learned from overhearing the conversations, was Victoria Ashford. The EMTs were being extremely careful with her, treating her like she was made of fine china, which made Marcus wonder about her importance in the community. Victoria kept glancing over at him while the paramedics examined her for injuries. She had a few scrapes on her hands and knees from when they'd hit the ground, but otherwise appeared unharmed. The driver of the SUV, a middle-aged man in a business suit, was conscious but complaining of chest pain. He kept apologizing repeatedly, explaining that his brakes had failed as he came down the hill. A police officer approached Marcus with a notepad. "Sir, I understand you witnessed the accident?" Marcus nodded, still feeling the adrenaline coursing through his system. "I was working in my field when I heard the tires screeching. I saw the SUV heading for the lady and just reacted." "That was quite a reaction," the officer said, scribbling notes. "The driver says his brakes went out. If you hadn't intervened, this could have been a fatality." Marcus glanced over at Victoria, who was now sitting in the back of the ambulance while a paramedic bandaged her scraped palms. She was still looking at him, and when their eyes met, she offered a small smile that made something flutter in his chest. "What's your name, sir?" The officer continued. "Marcus Thompson. I own the farm here." He gestured toward his property, suddenly aware of how he must look. Dirt-stained work clothes, scuffed boots, and hands that showed a lifetime of manual labor. Next to Victoria's polished elegance, he felt like he belonged to a different world entirely. After giving his statement, Marcus was about to head back to his interrupted work when Victoria approached him. She moved carefully, favoring her left leg slightly, but her posture remained graceful and confident. "Mr. Thompson," she said, and even his simple name sounded different in her cultured voice. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, unused to being the center of attention. "Like I said, anyone would have done the same." Victoria studied his face intently. "No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have stood there watching in shock. You risked your own life to save a complete stranger." There was something in her tone that made Marcus look at her more carefully. Up close, he could see that she was probably around his age, with laugh lines around her eyes that suggested she smiled often, despite the seriousness of the current situation. Her clothes, even disheveled from the accident, were clearly expensive. The watch on her wrist probably cost more than Marcus made in 6 months. "I'm just glad you're okay," he said simply. Victoria seemed to want to say more, but the paramedic called her back to the ambulance. "We'd like to take you to the hospital for observation," the EMT explained, just as a precaution. She nodded, then turned back to Marcus. "Will you be here later? I'd like to talk to you again when this is all sorted out." Marcus felt a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety. "I'll be around. I'm always around." As the ambulance pulled away with Victoria inside, Marcus watched until it disappeared over the hill. Then he returned to his field, trying to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting back to those few intense moments when he'd held a stranger in his arms and felt her heart beating against his chest. The rest of the day passed in a blur of curious neighbors and phone calls from local reporters who had somehow heard about the accident. Marcus had never been comfortable with attention, and he found himself hiding in the barn when a news van pulled up to his driveway. He had no interest in being called a hero. He'd simply done what felt right in the moment. That evening, as Marcus sat on his porch with Rex at his feet, a sleek silver car pulled into his driveway. Even in the fading light, he could see it was expensive, the kind of vehicle that probably had more technology than his entire house. Victoria Ashford stepped out, moving more easily now, though she still favored her left side slightly. She had changed clothes and now wore dark jeans and a simple white blouse, but she still looked like she belonged in a different world than his. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and Marcus noticed she carried a large basket in her hands. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," she said as she approached the porch. "I brought you something." Marcus stood, suddenly aware of his unchanged work clothes and the fact that he probably smelled like farm animals. "You didn't need to do that. How are you feeling?" "Sore, but grateful to be alive." She held up the basket. "It's not much, just some things from the gourmet market in town. I wasn't sure what farmers like to eat." The comment might have sounded condescending from someone else, but Victoria said it with such genuine uncertainty that Marcus found it endearing. He accepted the basket and peeked inside to find expensive cheeses, imported crackers, wine, and chocolate that probably cost more than his weekly grocery budget. "This is very generous," he said. "Would you like to sit for a while?" Victoria looked around the modest porch with its weathered wooden chairs and potted plants that Marcus's mother had loved. "I'd like that very much." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the sun set over the fields. Rex, ever friendly, wandered over to investigate the newcomer and was rewarded with gentle scratches behind his ears. "Beautiful dog," Victoria said. "What's his name?" "Rex. He's my farming partner. Keeps the chickens in line and alerts me to any trouble." Victoria smiled at that. "How long have you had the farm?" "All my life. My grandfather bought this land in 1952, and it's been in the family ever since." Marcus gestured toward the fields. "It's not much, but it's home." "It's peaceful," Victoria said, and there was something wistful in her voice. "I can't remember the last time I sat somewhere this quiet." Marcus found himself curious about her life, about what would make someone who could afford expensive cars and gourmet food sound almost envious of his simple existence. But before he could ask, Victoria's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and sighed. "I'm sorry, I have to take this. It's work." As she answered the call, Marcus could hear a man's voice on the other end, speaking rapidly and with obvious urgency. Victoria's responses were brief and professional, but he noticed the tension creeping into her shoulders. "Yes, I understand the timeline," she was saying. "No, the accident won't affect the project. I'll be in the office first thing tomorrow." When she hung up, some of the softness had gone out of her expression. She looked tired and stressed, older somehow than she had moments before. "Everything all right?" Marcus asked. Victoria managed a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just work. It never stops even when you almost die." There was a bitterness in her tone that made Marcus want to ask more questions, but he sensed she didn't want to talk about it. Instead, he offered her something he rarely shared with anyone, a glimpse into his world. "Would you like to see the farm?" he asked. "The animals are settling in for the night, but they're usually friendly to visitors." Victoria's face lit up with genuine interest. "I'd love that. I've never actually been on a working farm before." As they walked toward the barn, Marcus realized that this strange day had brought him something he hadn't expected. The company of someone who seemed as curious about his world as he was becoming about hers. Victoria followed Marcus around the farm with the enthusiasm of a child discovering something magical. She asked questions about everything: how he decided what crops to plant, why the chickens were different colors, how he knew when the vegetables were ready to harvest. Her genuine curiosity surprised him. Most people from town viewed farming as simple, outdated work, but Victoria seemed to understand the complexity and skill involved. "This is Bessie," Marcus said, introducing her to his favorite dairy cow. "She's been with us for 8 years now. Gives the best milk in the county." Victoria reached out tentatively to pet Bessie's flank. The cow, used to Marcus's gentle touch, stood calmly as Victoria stroked her side. "She's so much bigger than I expected," Victoria laughed, "and warmer. Most people don't realize how intelligent cows are," Marcus explained. "Bessie knows her routine better than I do sometimes. She'll head to the milking station before I even call for her." As they continued the tour, Victoria's expensive shoes collected mud and hay, but she didn't seem to mind. She helped Marcus fill water troughs and even tried her hand at scattering feed for the chickens, laughing delightedly when they flocked around her feet. "I had no idea farming was so much work," she said as they finished checking on the animals. "You do all this by yourself?" Marcus nodded. "Mostly. I have a neighbor kid who helps with hay season, and Mrs. Patterson from down the road watches the animals when I have to go to town for supplies." "Don't you ever want to do something else? Travel maybe, or live in the city?" The question caught Marcus off guard. "I've thought about it," he admitted, "especially during the hard times when the bills pile up and the equipment breaks down. But this land is part of me. My grandfather used to say that a man who doesn't have roots can't truly grow." Victoria was quiet for a moment, looking out over the fields that were now bathed in moonlight. "That's beautiful," she said softly. "I don't think I've ever had that kind of connection to any place." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, Victoria's phone rang again. This time she looked at the caller ID and declined the call, but not before Marcus saw the frustration flash across her face. "Persistent boss?" he asked. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Something like that." She paused, seeming to wrestle with something internally. "Can I tell you something? You might think it's silly. Try me. Today when you knocked me down and we were lying there in the grass, it was the first time in months that my phone wasn't in my hand. For just a few seconds, the world went completely quiet. No emails, no meetings, no deadlines. Just silence. I'd forgotten what that felt like." Marcus studied her face in the porch light. "What do you do for work?" "I'm a corporate acquisitions lawyer for Ashford and Associates," she said, and suddenly several pieces clicked into place for Marcus. Ashford wasn't just her last name. It was the name on one of the biggest law firms in the state. He'd seen their advertisements in the newspaper and on billboards around town. "That sounds important," he said carefully. "It is, and demanding, and completely consuming." Victoria sank into one of the porch chairs. "I work 70-hour weeks, sometimes more. I haven't taken a real vacation in 3 years. I eat most of my meals at my desk, and I can't remember the last time I had a conversation that wasn't about work." "Why do you do it?" The simple question seemed to surprise her. "Because it's what I'm supposed to do. I have a law degree from Harvard. I'm good at what I do, and it pays extremely well. My family expects it, my colleagues respect it, and society tells me I should be grateful for the opportunity." "But do you like it?" Victoria was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I used to, or at least I thought I did. But lately I feel like I'm drowning in other people's expectations." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the farm, crickets chirping, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through cornstalks. It was a stark contrast to the urban symphony of car horns and sirens that Victoria was accustomed to. "What about you?" she asked eventually. "Do you ever feel trapped by expectations?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Sometimes. People in town think I should sell the farm, move to the city, get a real job. They see this as backward, old-fashioned. But I wake up every morning excited about the day ahead. I know every inch of this land. Every season brings something new, and I'm contributing something valuable to my community. That has to count for something. It counts for everything, Victoria said with surprising intensity. You have something most people spend their whole lives searching for. Purpose that comes from within, not from what others think you should want. Over the next week, Victoria began stopping by the farm regularly. She claimed it was to check on Marcus and make sure he was okay after the accident, but Marcus suspected there was more to it. She would arrive in her expensive car wearing business clothes, then help with farm chores until her suit was dirty and her hair was mussed. The transformation was remarkable. Away from the pressure of her law practice, Victoria became lighter, more spontaneous. She laughed at Marcus's stories about ornery roosters and escaped pigs. She learned to collect eggs without frightening the hens. She even helped repair a section of fence, discovering she had a talent for manual work that her corporate job had never revealed. I think I was born in the wrong century, she joked one afternoon as they worked together in the vegetable garden. I'm better at this than I am at contract negotiations. Marcus watched her carefully transplant tomato seedlings with gentle, precise movements. You're good at a lot of things. Maybe you just haven't had the chance to explore them all. Their friendship deepened with each visit. Victoria began bringing dinner from expensive restaurants in town, and they would eat together on the porch while discussing everything from philosophy to favorite movies. Marcus learned that beneath her polished professional exterior was a woman who felt deeply, questioned constantly, and longed for something more meaningful than billable hours and client meetings. For his part, Marcus found himself looking forward to Victoria's visits with an anticipation that both thrilled and worried him. She brought energy and perspective to his quiet world, challenging his assumptions and encouraging him to think beyond the boundaries of his small farm. But he also knew that their worlds were fundamentally different, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was living in a beautiful dream that would eventually have to end. The reality of their different circumstances became impossible to ignore when Victoria's phone calls became more frequent and urgent. Marcus could see the stress returning to her face as the demands of her career pulled her back toward the life she was trying to escape. They need me for a major acquisition, she explained apologetically one evening as she prepared to leave, earlier than usual. It's a multi-million-dollar deal and the client specifically requested me. That's quite an honor, Marcus said, trying to keep his disappointment out of his voice. Is it? Victoria asked, pausing at her car door. Or is it just another golden chain? As she drove away, Marcus was left with the growing realization that he had fallen in love with a woman whose life pulled her in a completely different direction from his own. The question was whether love would be enough to bridge the gap between their two worlds or whether some differences were simply too great to overcome. The major acquisition Victoria had mentioned kept her away from the farm for nearly 2 weeks. Marcus found himself checking his phone constantly, hoping for a text or call that rarely came. When messages did arrive, they were brief and apologetic. She was working 18-hour days, sleeping in her office, and barely had time to eat, much less drive out to Millbrook Valley. Marcus tried to focus on his work, but everything reminded him of Victoria. The tomatoes she had helped plant were beginning to ripen. The fence they had repaired together stood straight and strong. Even Rex seemed to be waiting for her return, often wandering to the driveway and looking expectantly toward the road. Tautiu, isolation. Marcus had once found peaceful, now felt lonely in a way it never had before. He realized that Victoria had awakened something in him that he hadn't even known was sleeping. The desire for partnership, for someone to share not just the work, but the small joys and daily discoveries that made farm life meaningful. On a rainy Thursday evening, Marcus was surprised to hear a car pulling into his driveway. But when he looked out the window, it wasn't Victoria's silver sedan. Instead, a large black luxury car sat in his yard, and 2 people in expensive suits were walking toward his porch. The man was tall and distinguished, with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. The woman was younger, probably in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a briefcase that looked like it cost more than Marcus's truck. "Mr. Thompson," the man said when Marcus opened the door. "I'm Richard Ashford, and this is my associate Jennifer Mills. We'd like to speak with you about our daughter, Victoria. Marcus's heart sank. He had wondered when this moment would come, when Victoria's family would decide that her friendship with a simple farmer was inappropriate and needed to end. He invited them in, offering coffee that they politely declined. Mr. Thompson, Richard Ashford began, settling into Marcus's modest living room like he owned the place. I understand you've become friendly with Victoria since the accident. Yes, sir. She's been very kind. Victoria is going through a difficult period, Jennifer Mills interjected. She's been questioning her career, her responsibilities, her place in our firm. Her work has been suffering as a result. Marcus felt a flash of anger. Maybe her work is suffering because she's working too much. When's the last time she took a real break? Richard Ashford's eyebrows rose slightly. Mr. Thompson, I don't think you understand the situation. Victoria is being considered for partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in the state. She's on track to earn more in a year than most people see in a lifetime. This is not the time for her to be distracted by— He gestured vaguely around the modest room. By what? Marcus asked quietly. By friendship? By finding some peace in her life? By fantasies about a simpler life that she's not suited for, Jennifer Mills said bluntly. Victoria has always been driven, ambitious, focused. This recent behavior is completely out of character. Maybe this is her real character, Marcus suggested. Maybe what you're seeing now is who she really is when she's not under constant pressure. The two lawyers exchanged glances. Richard Ashford leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. Mr. Thompson, let me be direct. We're prepared to make this worth your while. There's a development company that's been interested in your property. With our connections, we could ensure you get double the market value for your farm. You could start over somewhere else, maybe try a different kind of life. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. You want to buy me off? We want to offer you opportunities, Jennifer Mills corrected. Think about it. No more worrying about crop failures or equipment breakdowns. No more struggling to make ends meet. You could go to college, learn a trade, see the world, and all I have to do is disappear from Victoria's life. We're simply pointing out that you and Victoria want different things, Richard Ashford said smoothly. She belongs in boardrooms and courtrooms, not barnyards. Surely you can see that. Marcus stood up slowly, his hands clenched at his sides. I think you should leave. Mr. Thompson, be reasonable. I said leave. Marcus's voice was quiet but firm. And don't come back to my property again. After they left, Marcus sat on his porch feeling like he'd been punched in the stomach. Part of him was furious at the arrogance and condescension Victoria's father and colleague had shown. But another part of him wondered if they were right. What did he really have to offer someone like Victoria? Security? He was one bad harvest away from bankruptcy. Excitement? His idea of adventure was trying a new variety of corn. Intellectual stimulation. He'd never been to college, never traveled beyond the state borders. The next evening, Victoria finally appeared at his door. She looked exhausted and stressed, with dark circles under her eyes and tension in every line of her body. I'm sorry, I haven't been by, she said, collapsing into a porch chair. This acquisition has been a nightmare. 18-hour days, impossible deadlines, clients who change their minds every 5 minutes. Marcus brought her a glass of iced tea and studied her face. Your father and Jennifer Mills came by yesterday. Victoria's expression immediately shifted from tired to alarmed. They what? What did they say? They offered to buy my farm so I'd stay away from you. Victoria closed her eyes and rubbed her temples. I'm so sorry, Marcus. They had no right to do that. They think I'm a bad influence on you, that I'm holding you back from your real life. My real life. Victoria's eyes flashed with anger. You mean the life where I haven't seen sunlight in 2 weeks? Where I eat every meal from a takeout container? Where I'm so stressed I can barely sleep? But it's the life you chose, Marcus said gently. The life you're good at. Victoria stared at him for a long moment. Is that what you think? That I chose this? Didn't you? I chose to go to law school because my father expected it. I chose To join the family firm because it was easier than disappointing everyone. I chose to work 80-hour weeks because that's what was required for success. But Marcus, I never chose to be miserable. She stood up and began pacing the porch. Do you know what I realized during these past 2 weeks? I was going through the motions, doing what I was supposed to do, but I wasn't living. I was just existing. So what do you want to do about it? Victoria stopped pacing and looked at him with an expression that was both hopeful and terrified. I want to find out who I really am when I'm not trying to be who everyone else wants me to be. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Hope, mixed with fear. And you think you can figure that out here? I think I can figure it out with you, she said softly. If you'll let me. Before Marcus could respond, Victoria's phone began ringing. She looked at the caller ID and her face hardened. It's the office. They probably want me to come in and work on the weekend. She declined the call, but it immediately started ringing again. You should answer it, Marcus said, even though the words felt like swallowing glass. Victoria looked at the phone, then at Marcus, then back at the phone. For a moment, he thought she was going to ignore it entirely. But years of conditioning were hard to break, and she finally answered. This is Victoria, she said, but her voice lacked its usual professional crispness. As she talked to whoever was on the other end, Marcus watched the transformation he had seen so many times before. Her posture straightened, her voice became clipped and efficient, and the woman who had been laughing with his chickens just days before disappeared behind a mask of professional competence. When she hung up, she looked defeated. There's an emergency with the acquisition. They need me to fly to Chicago tonight. Marcus nodded, trying to keep his disappointment from showing. When will you be back? I don't know, Victoria said, and there was something in her voice that made Marcus wonder if she was talking about more than just the business trip. This deal could take weeks to close. As she gathered her things to leave, Victoria paused at her car door. Marcus, what your father said about me not being suited for this life, what if he's right? Marcus looked at the woman who had helped him repair fences and plant vegetables, who had found joy in collecting eggs and peace in watching sunsets from his porch. I think you're the only one who can answer that question. As her taillights disappeared into the night, Marcus was left with the growing realization that Victoria was standing at a crossroads, and he had no idea which path she would choose. 3 weeks passed without a word from Victoria. Marcus threw himself into his work with desperate intensity, trying to silence the voice in his head that wondered if she had made her choice. The late summer harvest was keeping him busy from dawn to dusk, but even exhaustion couldn't stop him from thinking about her. Mrs. Patterson, his elderly neighbor, noticed his distraction when she stopped by to collect eggs. You've been moping around like a lost calf, she observed with her usual directness. That city girl still got you all twisted up? Marcus tried to deny it, but Mrs. Patterson had known him since he was a boy. She could read him like one of her recipe books. She'll come back, the older woman said with surprising gentleness. A woman doesn't look at a man the way she looked at you and then just disappear forever. Her family thinks I'm not good enough for her, Marcus admitted. And maybe they're right. Mrs. Patterson snorted. Richard Ashford wouldn't know good enough if it bit him on his fancy behind. That man measures worth in dollar signs, not in character. You know him? I worked as a secretary at his firm for 30 years before I retired. Watched him build that empire of his and watched what it cost him. You know he's been married 4 times? Can't keep a relationship together because he treats people like business deals. This revelation surprised Marcus. Victoria had mentioned her father but never talked about her family life in any detail. That girl of his is different, though, Mrs. Patterson continued. Always was, even as a child. Used to come to the office with her father sometimes during school breaks. While he was in meetings, she'd sit with me and ask about my garden, my grandchildren, anything that wasn't about law or money. She said she chose law school because it was expected, Marcus said. Chose hell. That man had her life planned out before she could walk. Private schools, then Harvard, then straight into the family business. Never gave her a chance to figure out what she actually wanted. The conversation stayed with Marcus, as he continued his daily routine. He began to understand that Victoria wasn't just struggling with feelings for him. She was struggling with the courage to live her own life, instead of the life that had been prescribed for her. On a humid Friday evening in late August, Marcus was loading vegetables for the Saturday farmers market when he saw a familiar silver car turning into his driveway. His heart jumped, but he forced himself to continue working, not wanting to seem too eager. Victoria stepped out of the car, and Marcus was shocked by her appearance. She had lost weight, her clothes hung loosely on her frame, and there were new lines of stress around her eyes. But there was also something different about her posture, a kind of determined resolution that hadn't been there before. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. "Victoria." He set down the crate of tomatoes and wiped his hands on his jeans. "How was Chicago?" "Successful, from a business perspective. We closed the deal, the client was happy, and the firm made a substantial profit." She paused, looking out over the fields that were golden in the evening light. "But I kept thinking about this place, about you, about what I was missing while I was sitting in conference rooms 16 hours a day." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, both aware that something fundamental had shifted during their time apart. "I've been thinking too," Marcus said, carefully. "About what your father said, about whether we're too different." Victoria's expression tightened. "And what conclusion did you reach?" "That maybe he's right about some things. We do come from different worlds. You're educated, sophisticated, used to luxury and excitement. I'm just a farmer who's never been more than 50 miles from where he was born." Victoria stepped closer. To him, her green eyes intense. "Is that really what you think? That I'm some shallow person who needs expensive things and constant stimulation to be happy? I think you deserve more than what I can offer. Marcus Thompson, you are the most infuriating man I have ever met." Victoria's voice rose with frustration. "Do you know what I've been doing for the past 3 weeks? Living the life my father thinks I should want. Closing deals worth millions of dollars, eating at 5-star restaurants, staying in luxury hotels, being praised by everyone for my intelligence and success." She began pacing, her emotions spilling over after weeks of keeping them bottled up. "And do you know what I thought about every single day? The way you look when you're explaining something about the farm. The sound of your laugh when Rex does something ridiculous. The peace I feel sitting on your porch watching the sunset. The way you make me feel like I matter as a person, not just as a billable hour machine." Marcus felt his resolve wavering. "Victoria, I quit," she said abruptly. "What?" "I quit the firm, yesterday. Walked into my father's office, put my resignation letter on his desk, and told him I was done." Marcus stared at her in shock. "You quit your job? Just like that?" "Just like that." Victoria laughed, but there was a hint of hysteria in it. 20 years of education, 3 years of working toward partnership, and I threw it all away. My father didn't speak to me for an hour. Jennifer Mills called me delusional. The other partners think I've had a nervous breakdown. Maybe you have," Marcus said gently. Victoria stopped pacing and looked at him. "Maybe I have, or maybe I've finally come to my senses. What are you going to do now?" "I don't know," Victoria admitted. "For the first time in my adult life, I have no plan, no schedule, no expectations to meet. It's terrifying and exhilarating at the same time." Marcus felt a mix of emotions, hope, fear, and a crushing sense of responsibility. "Victoria, you can't make this kind of decision because of me. What if things don't work out between us? What if you regret giving up everything you've worked for?" "I'm not doing this for you," Victoria said firmly. "I'm doing this for me. Because I finally realized that success without happiness is just a very expensive form of failure." She sat down heavily on the porch steps, suddenly looking vulnerable and uncertain. "But I won't lie to you, Marcus. Part of my decision was about us, about wanting to find out what we could be if I wasn't constantly being pulled away by work." Marcus sat down beside her, close enough to smell her perfume mixed with the scent of hay and summer air. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Of what?" of not being enough for you, of you waking up one morning and realizing you've made a terrible mistake, of loving you so much that I can't think straight. Victoria turned to face him, her eyes soft with understanding. I'm scared too. Scared of starting over, scared of disappointing people, scared of failing at something I actually care about. She reached for his hand. But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been. They sat together as the last light faded from the sky, both aware that they were standing at the beginning of something that could either be wonderful or heartbreaking, possibly both. So what happens now? Marcus asked. Now we figure it out together, Victoria said. If you're willing to take a chance on a former lawyer who doesn't know the first thing about real life but is eager to learn. Marcus looked at her. This brave, complicated woman who had walked away from everything familiar to pursue something uncertain and felt his last defenses crumble. I love you, he said simply. I love you too, Victoria replied. Even if I don't know what that means yet or where it leads us. As they kissed under the star-filled sky, both of them knew that the hardest part was yet to come. Love was just the beginning. Now they had to figure out how to build a life together that honored both of their dreams and fears. But for the first time since the accident that had brought them together, they were facing the future as partners, ready to discover what was possible when two people from different worlds decided that love was worth the risk. 6 months later, Marcus woke before dawn to find Victoria already in the kitchen, making coffee with the ease of someone who had learned to love early mornings. She wore old jeans and one of his flannel shirts, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. The transformation from corporate lawyer to farm partner had been gradual but remarkable. The Hendersons want to increase their weekly vegetable order, she said, handing him a steaming mug. And Mrs. Chen from the bakery called about supplying herbs for their new organic bread line. Victoria had thrown herself into learning the business side of farming with the same intensity she had once brought to legal briefs. She had discovered a talent for marketing and customer relations that was helping Marcus expand beyond simple crop sales. Her connections in town, combined with her business acumen, had opened doors that Marcus had never imagined possible. We're going to need to expand the herb garden, Marcus mused, reviewing the numbers Victoria had compiled, and maybe add another greenhouse for winter growing. I've been thinking about that, Victoria said, settling beside him at the kitchen table. They had refinished together. What if we applied for that sustainable agriculture grant? With my legal background, I could handle the paperwork, and the money would let us expand without taking on debt. Marcus smiled at her enthusiasm. The woman who had once dreaded paperwork now attacked grant applications and business plans with relish, mainly because she could see how they connected to something tangible and meaningful. The early months hadn't been easy. Victoria had struggled with the physical demands of farm work, and Marcus had worried constantly that she would wake up one morning missing her old life. There had been arguments about money, lifestyle, and the future. Victoria's savings account had cushioned them through the transition, but both of them knew that long-term success would require the farm to be profitable on its own. The community reaction had been mixed. Some people admired Victoria's courage in choosing love over money. Others whispered that she was either crazy or slumming it for the novelty. Richard Ashford had initially refused to speak to his daughter, though Mrs. Patterson reported that he had been driving past the farm regularly, apparently checking to see if Victoria was still there. He's worried about you, Mrs. Patterson had told Victoria during one of her visits. He may not understand your choice, but he loves you in his own complicated way. The breakthrough in their relationship with Victoria's father had come during harvest season, when Marcus injured his back and couldn't work for 2 weeks. Victoria had single-handedly organized neighbors and friends to help bring in the crops, displaying leadership and problem-solving skills that reminded everyone why she had been successful in corporate law. Richard Ashford had shown up unexpectedly during the harvest, wearing expensive clothes that were completely inappropriate for farm work. But he had stayed all day, helping load trucks and asking quiet questions about crop yields and farming techniques. He hadn't said much to Marcus, but when he left, he had hugged his daughter and told her he was proud of her. Not for giving up law, he had clarified, but for having the courage to choose your own path. Now, as spring approached again, Marcus and Victoria were planning their first full growing season as true partners. They had weathered the challenges of learning to live and work together, and their relationship had deepened beyond the initial attraction into something steady and enduring. "I have something to tell you," Victoria said as they finished their morning coffee. There was something in her tone that made Marcus look up from the seed catalogs they had been reviewing. "What is it?" Victoria smiled, a mix of excitement and nervousness in her expression. "Janet Morrison called yesterday. She's retiring and wants to know if I'd be interested in taking over her practice." Janet Morrison was Millbrook's only attorney, handling everything from real estate closings to simple wills. It wasn't corporate law, but it would allow Victoria to use her legal training while staying in the community she had grown to love. "What, did you tell her?" Marcus asked carefully. "I told her I'd think about it." "But Marcus, it would be perfect. I could work part-time, help people in town with their legal needs, and still be here for planting and harvest seasons." Marcus felt a surge of pride and relief. This was the solution they had been looking for, a way for Victoria to contribute professionally while maintaining the life they had built together. "You should do it," he said. "The town needs a good lawyer, and you need intellectual challenges that go beyond crop rotation schedules." Victoria laughed. "Hey, crop rotation is more intellectually challenging than most people realize." They spent the morning working in the greenhouse, transplanting seedlings and planning the layout for the expanded herb garden. It was quiet, productive, work that allowed them to talk about their dreams for the farm and their future together. "I want to start offering farm tours," Victoria said, as she carefully repotted basil plants. "Educational visits for school groups, maybe weekend workshops for people who want to learn about sustainable agriculture." "You really think people would be interested? Are you kidding? Half the lawyers in my father's firm have never seen where their food comes from. There's a whole market of people who want to reconnect with the land but don't know how." Marcus watched Victoria work with the same gentle precision she brought to everything on the farm. Her hands, once soft and manicured, now bore the calluses and small scars that came from daily physical work. But her face had a peace and contentment that had been missing during her corporate days. "Victoria," he said, setting down his own work. "Will you marry me?" Victoria's hands stilled on the plant she was holding. She looked up at him with surprise that quickly melted into joy. "Right here? Right now? With dirt under my fingernails and seeds in my hair?" "Especially with dirt under your fingernails and seeds in your hair," Marcus said. "This is who you really are. This is who I fell in love with." Victoria set down the basil plant and reached for his hands. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you. But I want a small wedding, here on the farm with the people who matter to us." "What about your father?" "He'll come around, and if he doesn't, that's his choice. I'm not going to let other people's expectations control my life anymore." As they kissed among the green growing things in the warm greenhouse, Marcus marveled at the unexpected turns life could take. A runaway SUV had brought them together, but it was their choice to build something lasting from that chaotic moment. The woman in his arms was no longer the stressed corporate lawyer he had saved from an accident, nor was she simply trying to escape her old life. Victoria had become someone new, a person who combined her intelligence and drive with a deep appreciation for simple pleasures and honest work. She was his partner in every sense of the word. "I love you, Farmer Thompson," Victoria whispered against his ear. "I love you too, future Mrs. Thompson," he replied, and knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, rooted in love and the good earth that had brought them home to each other. Outside the greenhouse, Rex barked at something in the distance, probably a squirrel in the oak tree. The sound of life continuing its daily rhythm was the perfect soundtrack for two people who had learned that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the depth of connection between two hearts brave enough to choose love over convention.